What was the sexiest decade for movies? That's exactly what we're going to be exploring in our new series, 100 Years of Romance, a decade-by-decade look at sex, love, and romance on the silver screen. Today, we're going to turn the clock back 100 years and kick the series off with the decade that brought us Speakeasy, Flapper, the Vamp, the Latin Lover, and the Charleston, the Roaring Twenties. Hi, welcome to Cinema Rolls, your go-to channel for movie comparisons. I'm your host, Basha, and I'm so anxious to get this series started that we're going to dive right in. Now, I have to admit that I wasn't really familiar with the silent film era, so before I could do this video, I had to sit down and watch a lot of movies, which was actually a lot more fun than you might think. And what I discovered was that, unlike any other decade that I'm aware of, the 20s brought us a lot of iconic characters that we're still familiar with today, like the ones I just mentioned, Flappers, Vamps, Latin Lovers, and a lot more. So I thought it would be fun to look at sex, love, and romance in the 20s through the eyes of these archetypes, exploring their stories and historical context, how they fall in love, their kisses, their near misses, how they make love, and how their stories end. And so we can do justice to these archetypes, we're going to dedicate an entire video to each of them. Starting with the feminine roles, today we're going to zoom in on what I call the virgins and saints or good girl archetype. These women could be the good wife as epitomized by Janet Gaynor in Sunrise and Seventh Heaven, the devoted daughter captured to perfection by Gloria Swanson in Beyond the Rocks, the faithful fiancé in tragic movies like Eternal Love and Faithful Heart, or the innocent child like Lillian Gish who breaks our hearts in Way Down East, and the tragic Timian played by Louise Brooks in Diary of a Lost Girl. Or she could simply be the victim of circumstance like Jenny Hasselqvist's Sumurun, who is the favorite wife of the sheik but secretly in love with a cloth merchant. Although they do have their light moments, the tone of the Good Girls movies is usually serious and often a bit melodramatic, and the heroine's virtue is strongly emphasized, which isn't surprising since we were coming out of the teens where melodramas like The Perils of Pauline dominated the movies. In fact, Janet Gaynor epitomized this archetype so completely that you can almost see the halo shining around her head. It's not surprising that traditional women would be glorified in the movies at this time. After all, women had just gotten the vote in 1920 and were testing the limits of their newfound freedoms and pushing for more. And historically, anytime women have made advances, there's been a lot of cultural pushback, and I think that's at least part of what we're seeing here and what we'll see later on when we look at the Flappers and Vamps. Of course, not all women of this era were embracing the brave new world. Plenty of them held on to traditional values, and just like the women they represented, our heroines in the good girls category usually have traditional goals. You know, finding a husband or keeping the one they've got, which was probably easier said than done given all those flappers and vamps running around. The stories of our virginal heroines are many and varied, but I noticed at least 4 recurring themes: women with a past, victims of infidelity, married off for money, and star-crossed lovers. We're going to dip our toes into some of these stories as we go along, but before we do, let's take a quick peek at how our good girls kissed in the movies. By the way, what do you think makes a kiss romantic? Let me know in the comments. Personally, I think the true test of any romance movie is the quality of its kissing scenes. And even though these scenes are relatively tame, they can be very tender indeed. this one just goes on and on and on. Kind of makes you curious as to what might have led to all that tenderness and passion, doesn't it? Let's explore that by taking a sneak peek at how our heroines fall in love. We're all familiar with those intensely charged scenes in older movies where eyes meet from across the room and couples fall in love so fast it makes your head spin. But this group of heroines tends to fall in love much more slowly over time and often very innocently. Still, there is a certain something at the very beginning that draws them together, and in a lot of cases, the hero is literally a hero who's come to the rescue in one way or another. A good example of this is the 1925 movie The Eagle, starring Rudolph Valentino as Vladimir Dubrovsky, a lieutenant in the Russian army, and Vilma Bonke as Masha, a young noblewoman. And right off the bat, I just want to say that this movie deserves the prize for the most beautiful romantic leads ever, don't you think? They first meet when he rescues her runaway carriage. When the two lock eyes for the first time, their mutual attraction is palpable. But they part ways without either of them knowing the other's identity, which makes for some interesting complications later on. In the 1922 movie Beyond the Rocks, Rudy Valentino comes to the rescue again. His character Hector has just rescued young Theodora, played by Gloria Swanson, from drowning in a boating accident, and she shyly rewards him with a narcissus blossom. This becomes a recurring theme in their story, and the next time he comes to her rescue is on her honeymoon with an older man that she's been married off to. She goes hiking without her husband and falls off a cliff in a scene not unlike the melodrama of the previous decade. Their attraction grows over the course of many accidental meetings while she struggles against her feelings for him until we finally see that moment of adult chemistry when she senses his eyes boring into her back. In Siren of the Tropics, Papitu, played by Josephine Baker, first meets Andre when he rescues her from a sexual assault by the lecherous overseer Alvarez. And later on, she has the opportunity to return the favor by rescuing him from an ambush by Alvarez and his gang, and now she's really falling for him. The tables are turned again in The Toll of the Sea, where the young girl Lotus Flower, played by Anna May Wong, also falls in love with the man that she's rescued, an American tourist who is washed up on the shore. She sees him as a gift from the sea and promises to give the sea anything in return, not knowing just how much the sea will ask of her. But I think the most romantic meeting of all is in Seventh Heaven, starring Janet Gaynor as Diane and Charles Farrell as Chico, who rescues Diane from being strangled in the street by her older sister. Diane first looks into Chico's eyes when he's dangling an onion over her head. Later, he saves her life for the second time that day, this time from herself. He takes her to his home, and their climb to his top-floor apartment symbolizes her ascent from a life of abuse to a state of grace, as close to heaven as you can get. And she falls in love with him because he shows her how to appreciate the beauty of life. Of course, good girls sometimes fall for the charm of bad boys in disguise, as is the case with Anna Moore, played by Lillian Gish in the 1920 film Way Down East. And this innocent infatuation will lead to her downfall. Sometimes the leading man is neither a hero nor a villain, just a nice guy, like David, whom Anna Moore meets later on in Way Down East. For David, it's love at first sight when Anna comes to work as a domestic servant in his family home, and she begins to fall in love with him as he speaks to her in nature metaphors, talking about two streams joining the same course. But she has a terrible secret that keeps her from showing her feelings. He does eventually come to her rescue in true heroic fashion, but that doesn't come until the end of the movie, after her secret is revealed and she's banished from the squire's house and sent out into the night during a winter storm. In Street Angel, it's Angela's temper that sparks the interest of Gino, the street artist, and she's finding his gaze a little disconcerting while she's trying to perform her circus act. But it's not until he paints her as he really sees her that she lets down her guard and begins to let him in. In Our Hospitality, William McKay and Virginia Canfield cautiously check each other out at the beginning of their long carriage journey while trying to appear casually disinterested. But things get a little unintentionally cozy, and they hit some rough spots along the way. But the courting doesn't really begin until after their arrival, when their paths cross again. Although I think the real love story here is about Willie's little dog who ran after the train the whole way. Sometimes the hero may seem like a villain at first. This was certainly the case for our next heroine, Salima, played by Anakashi Rama Rao in the 1928 Indian movie Shiraz, who meets her future husband under inauspicious circumstances. She's sold to him as a concubine in his harem. For him, it's love at first sight, while she maintains a respectful distance. He gently romances her, and when she resists his advances, he reminds her that he has the power to take what he wants. She acknowledges the truth of that, but tells him that he does not have the power to take her love, and he agrees that he wouldn't want her without her love. And this is the beginning of one of the greatest love stories ever told. To find out why, you'll want to be sure to watch our video on the male archetypes of the 20s. Of course, there's a dark side to what can be passed off as romance, but is actually something much more nefarious. Possessiveness at best and predatory villainy at worst. And surprisingly, movies in the 20s didn't shy away from difficult topics. So let's take a look at some of our heroines' near misses. By that I mean how they fend off or succumb to unwanted advances. In Way Down East, Lennox brings Anna to his apartment on the pretense of introducing her to his aunt. In Diary of a Lost Girl, Timian is lured to the pharmacy with promises of a secret to be revealed. When she collapses in the pharmacist's arms on hearing the news, he carries her to his bed. And although the rape isn't explicitly spelled out, the impact is clear in the next scene, where the family is discussing what to do about her baby. Life in the harem can be difficult, especially when the sheik suspects you of having an affair, as we see in the 1921 movie Sumaroon. Unless, of course, the slave trader is offering him a dancer of unsurpassed beauty. Then he drops the matter. For the moment. But he doesn't forget, and when her head is on the chopping block, she's rescued by the sheik's son, who mistakenly believes that she's in love with him. In the 1927 movie Siren of the Tropics, two women are in love with the same man, but they both have to fight off unwanted advances from lecherous older men, which they do rather well. Denise, played by Regina Thomas, has to fight off her own godfather, and Papitu, played by Josephine Baker, is preyed upon by her vulgar landlord. I'm glad we got that out of the way. It's no wonder women were pushing for their freedoms. But have we made any advances since then? Let me know what you think. Now, I know you're anxious to see how our good girls made love willingly in the movies, so let's move on. Of course, as you would expect, none of the stories in this group have any explicit lovemaking, but these women do find some interesting ways to keep their love alive. In The Toll of the Sea, Lotus Flower learns that Alan, the man who abandoned her 3 years earlier, has returned, so she rushes home to get dressed up in her bridal gown and has the maid bathe and dress their 3-year-old son. When she finds out that he's brought his new wife with him, instead of making a scene, she invites them both to tea in her garden and tries to keep up a brave front while her heart is breaking. Now that's grace. In both Seventh Heaven and Street Angel, Janet Gaynor's character is separated from her beloved and develops an almost psychic way of communicating with him long distance. Diane and Chico are separated when he goes off to war, moments after they've taken their impromptu wedding vows, which is heartbreaking in itself. Throughout their long separation, every morning at 11, they stop whatever they're doing and think of each other. Chico in the trenches and Diane in the munitions factory. This movie has so many beautiful and uplifting scenes, I wish I could share them all with you. But I can't, so if you haven't seen it yet, please do. In Street Angel, Angela is separated from Gino when the law finally catches up with her just after she's accepted his proposal. She begs the police officer to let her have just 1 hour with Gino to explain her past to him, but instead, she spends that time toasting their future and giving him the happiness that she thinks will bring him success with the mural he's been commissioned to paint. Then she puts him to bed and slips off to the workhouse for a year, keeping herself happy in the belief that her beloved is doing something great in the world. In Faithful Heart, Marie and Jean are separated by her forced marriage to a petty crook, and he sees her face in the reflection of the sea as if she's willing her soul to be with him. In these movies, love was shown as pure and noble, wanting the very best for the beloved rather than wanting to possess them. And no love story would be complete without a wedding album. Well, technically that's not really true, but let's look at some wedding pictures anyway. Here's one shotgun wedding that put an end to a family feud. In Seventh Heaven, Chico can't bring himself to propose to Diane in so many words, so he proposes by giving her a wedding dress. And they have to improvise their own wedding without the benefit of a preacher before Chico heads off to war. Our only royal wedding is in Shiraz, where Salima becomes the Empress of India. In Way Down East, Anna marries Lennox, but little does she know that the wedding is a sham with no legal validity. It's just a ploy that Lennox uses to get her into the honeymoon suite, with devastating consequences. But Anna's second wedding to David is real, and it's a family affair, a triple wedding. In Beyond the Rocks, Theodora's father gives her one last chance to back out of her marriage to a wealthy older man, but she decides to go through with it to help her father out of his financial difficulties. In The Eagle, Dubrovsky is sentenced to death for desertion, so he and Masha marry in prison, just as he's about to face the firing squad. In Sunrise, starring Janet Gaynor and George O'Brien, the husband follows his wife into a church where she seeks refuge after he tries to drown her so that he can free himself to run off with another woman. Hearing the wedding vows being recited at the altar, he's filled with remorse and begs his wife for forgiveness. They repeat their vows and live happily ever after. Or as happily as you can with someone who's tried to murder you. In Eternal Love, Marcus, played by John Barrymore, is tricked into marrying Pia, who convinces him that he's had his way with her one drunken night. His true love, Celia, played by Camilla Horn, marries Lorenzo on the rebound, but her heart is with Marcus. In the end, Marcus and Celia find a way to be together for eternity. As we've seen, although there are a few tragic endings, most of the women in this group have happy endings, and the messaging seems to be that virtue will be rewarded. But there will be bumps along the way, and they will be put to the test before they get to their happy endings. Before we go, I just want to share my favorite happy ending with you. This is from Seventh Heaven. Chico finally returns from the war and makes his way up to the apartment even though he's blind. Diane is overjoyed to see him and promises to be his eyes and keep him as close to heaven as he kept her. And he lets her know that the blindness won't keep him down for long because, as he's been telling her all along, he's a very remarkable fellow. I hope you enjoyed our little review of The Good Girls of the 20s. Of course, there was so much more to all these movies than we could cover here, and the artistry and cinematography of the silent films brings so much more to the experience that they really have to be seen to be appreciated. The good news is that you can see a lot of them right here on YouTube, and many of them have been beautifully remastered. In the description below, you'll find some links to where you can stream them or buy your own copies. In our next video, we'll take a look at the love lives of the Flappers. You'll want to be sure to catch that one because we've got some really fun movies lined up. So be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button so you'll know when it comes up. In the meantime, check out this video on the cinematic origins of that master of romance, Pepe Le Pew. See you next time. Until then, try some cinema rolls. They're good for you.